Thank you for listening. I'm going to be reading The Darkness, Part 9. The first thing Dia saw when she opened her eyes the next day was Mark. He was standing next to her bed, all ready to go. She could tell he was anxious about her meeting with Steve. He ran his fingers through his hair the way he does when he gets nervous. "Good morning, Dia," he said as soon as he noticed she was awake. He handed her a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice. "Good morning, thank you," Dia said, taking a sip of her juice. The glass was cold, and the sweet smell of oranges instantly made her feel awake. "There's something we need to talk about before you meet with." He paused, then thought for a moment as if he was trying to remember something, then said, "Steve, I want you to tell me if anything happens that we're not aware of. Also, you need to know that he's very dangerous and you can't trust him. Sean and I will be standing by the whole time." Dia felt a knot in her stomach. She didn't know who or what to believe. "But if there's something that happens that we miss," Mark continued, "I need you to tell me. I don't trust him at all, and I hate putting you in this position, but I feel like we don't have a choice. What is happening to Jay will in time also happen to me and Sean." "I won't let that happen," Dia said and smiled at him. "I'll learn everything I need to know to stop that from happening, and everything will be okay. I'm going to start getting ready now." Dia got out of bed and she stood next to Mark for a moment. So much was running through her mind that it was making her stomach hurt. In her heart, she feared that this man she's been married to for 5 years now was still a complete stranger to her. Mark was the only person she had ever been with, and yet she didn't feel like she was betraying him by not telling him what Steve was already capable of. After all, Mark did drag her by force into the basement and nearly killed her. Why should I tell him anything? Why should I tell him about Steve being able to talk to me telepathically or transfer his energy to me through his hands? I am not saying anything, not until I know for sure who I can trust, she thought. She decided this was the best thing to do for now. Then she went to go get ready. Dia took a long hot shower, then put on her favorite sundress and a pair of sandals. By the time she walked outside, Steve was already standing there by the wall next to the pool. Mark and Sean walked outside with her. It was a very cloudy day. The clouds were thick, yet the sun made an effort to shine through them. The air was warm and pleasant. Overall, the day felt dreamlike to Dia, romantic even. They walked over to Steve. Steve was wearing long pants and a short-sleeved shirt. He had both hands in his pocket. The wind tousled his short, black, wavy hair. The bit of sunlight seemed to naturally gravitate to him. Dia's heart was beating so quickly she could almost see it beating through her sundress. Sean was right next to her. She felt his arm and fingers brush against her arm as they walked. Mark walked slightly ahead of them with clenched fists. Mark and Sean were about the same height and built as Steve. The guys briefly said hello to each other. Steve promised them that by the end of the day, Jay would be back to normal, but that they would have to let him and Dia work. The sound of the waves crashing made it so that they had to speak louder. Steve rubbed his hands together slowly as he explained to them that some of the things he would be teaching Dia required him to touch her. Sean sighed and Mark folded his arms. Steve also told them they would be attracting the sun, and he suggested Mark and Sean waited by the back table where there was some shade. At that point, Sean got very close to Steve and grabbed him by the shirt and said, "If you do anything to her, I'll kill you." Steve pulled his shirt down and took a step back. Then he breathed in deep as he tried to keep himself together. A smile spread across Mark's face. "Remember what we talked about? We'll be sitting right over there," Mark told Dia. Then he kissed her lips gently. Dia turned her head and looked at Mark and Sean as they walked past the pool to the back part of the house. Then she looked at Steve. He reminded her of someone, but she wasn't sure who. "I'm glad to be alone with you finally, little princess," he said quietly. Dia knew that Mark and Sean were sitting too far to hear any of the conversation. "Why did you just call me that?" she asked him, smiling. "Because you are. Do you remember what you did 3 days ago when you were out here with them? Can you remember what happened?" "I was trying to. I know I lost consciousness and I was lying on the grass. I also know they killed that girl. They were all on the cabana. I remember them attacking her. Before that, I was in the basement. I thought they were going to kill me. That's all I can remember, just bits and pieces of things. Can you tell me what happened when we were out here?" "I'll tell you everything I saw. You were very weak. I wanted to help you, but I didn't want them to know I was watching. They purposely drank a lot of your blood because they didn't want you to remember. Believe me, that was not the first time." Steve said as Dia listened in quiet amazement. She tried not to show in her face the pain that was ripping through her heart. "They have done this before with you. It's the reason why they can be out in the daylight. The only reason you remember pieces of it this time is because I was around you. I believe my presence there gave you strength," he said. Dia looked down as a tear rolled down her face. Steve lifted her chin and looked into her eyes. Her bright, round eyes looked up at him. The very moment he touched her, clouds parted and the sun shined directly on them. "Repeat after me, little princess," he said. And his voice was strong. It reverberated around her. "In contaminus terminus, we are sun. A spiritus semptimus, the sun is ours." Suddenly, she remembered her role that day. She cried out, "In contaminus terminus, a spiritus semptimus." Instantly, they were surrounded by what looked like flames. It formed a circle around them, catching Dia off guard, so she gasped. Steve wrapped his arms around her, holding on to her tightly. A flood of energy came in and traveled through them like an ocean of emotions. Then a standstill, an infinite pause, followed by a wave of warmth and life coming from above. It emptied itself onto them, and they were immersed in its light. Mark and Sean's eyes never left Dia. Sean sat shaking his legs, while Mark continuously tapped his fingers on the table. "We can't hear anything they're saying. This doesn't feel right," Sean said. "I know, but do we have a choice?" "Do you think she remembers what we did to her?" Mark asked. "Not sure. She's acting the same. The day before yesterday, though, I noticed something." "What?" Mark asked, looking at Sean. "She burned my hands by accident." Mark put his face in his hands and sighed. "Why are you telling me this now, Sean?" "Before that, she had been outside, and I sensed someone had been out there with her," Sean told Mark in a hesitant voice. Mark kicked the chair next to him. It flew back and landed on the floor. Then, almost in a horrified voice, Sean said, "Mark, look." They both stared at Dia and Steve as white puffy clouds parted and the bright sun shined vigorously on them. Then Dia and Steve were covered suddenly in a bright white light. They were engulfed in it, and it completely obscured them. Mark and Sean jumped up quickly and started running towards them. Mark stuck his arm in, almost squeezing his way through the bright light. Then he shut both eyes and gasped. At that very moment, the light bubble disappeared, and they could clearly see Dia and Steve. It melted away, taking away its magnificence, removing its magic, and leaving behind the same feelings of regret and fear that were there before. "Why did you do that?" Dia yelled at him. Her eyes were full of rage. "Look at your arm." Mark's arm was burnt up to his shoulder. His skin looked scorched, and there was a large amount of reddish scalded tissue. His shirt sleeve had burnt completely off, and there were smoldering pieces of it hitting the ground. Steve calmed Dia down by telling her that Mark's arm would heal quickly, and his arm looked like it was beginning to cauterize and heal as he spoke. "That's enough for today. I need to be able to see her at all times," Mark said furiously. "I didn't intend for that to happen. I didn't expect her to be so powerful," Steve said, looking at Dia. It was very true, and Dia felt powerful with him. "Before he leaves again, I need to know why we have this connection and ability. I need to know who I am," she thought desperately. So she tried asking him telepathically for the first time. "Steve, what am I?" she asked. "Your son child," he answered in her mind. I'll be back tomorrow, Steve said to Mark and Sean, then warned them, but don't touch her for the remainder of the day or you will burn. Then Steve spoke in her mind and said, I'll see you tomorrow, little princess. Dia smiled at him and her heart fluttered at the sound of his voice. He left and they all walked back in the house. The remainder of the day seemed slow and apathetic to Dia. Colors around her weren't as bright. Nothing sounded clear and things didn't taste good. She couldn't smell anything, and when she touched things, there was not much feeling there. Evening came and it got dark, and for once she was excited about that. Jay was feeling much better, and Mark's arm was completely healed. That night, the three of them gathered around her. You feel okay? Mark asked. Yes, I feel almost back to normal, Dia answered. And she was. She felt a lot better than she had that morning after Steve left. Touch me, Sean said, reaching out his hands. She came very close to his skin without touching him, and his skin turned very red. Sean pulled his hands away. She still feels very hot, he said. So tell us, what did you learn? Mark said. Dia lifted her eyes up slowly to look at the three of them. Then she said very slowly, I learned more about who I am.